Hi everybody. So today's topic is, I think, a really important one about misconceptions, especially about how much people actually train. I think that a lot of people think that serious lifters train a lot more than they actually do. And I think that because I know that I was certainly one of them in my earlier days. I definitely used to see all these things about how Kai Greene trains for 3 hours a day, or how Bruce Lee would do X amount of training. And I always thought, oh, okay, so I've got to train like that in order to get good results. But that's actually kind of the opposite of how it works. What we actually see when we dig into the research is simply that you get incredibly high efficient results from training for a very short period of time and just doing a very small number of exercises and just training hard. And then every additional set, every additional exercise, every additional workout that we complete per week is actually going to be slightly less effective than the previous one. And that's simply because there are limits to this sort of thing. It's diminishing returns, and there are just practical limits to how much training we can actually adapt to and improve from. And so as a result, yes, while certain world-class lifters may have to train more than the average person, certainly, the reality is that actually they don't train nearly as much as people tend to think. And in fact, I would argue that most people probably should be training even less than that. When I was at university, for example, I was just starting out lifting. I would train sometimes basically 2 hours a day of lifting weights, and then I would also do an hour of cardio, and then I was also doing like a boot camp class on top of that 3 or 4 days a week. The end result was simply that I just was doing way too much. I was training constantly, and I saw basically no results because of that. I saw that I was trying to build strength and I wasn't. I was actually getting weaker because I was losing weight. I was trying to build muscle mass, but I was training so much that I was burning just so many calories. I wasn't eating enough to replace that. I was just constantly exhausted, and I was just not seeing progress towards any of my goals. I guess technically what you could say is that I was getting really good at training, and I was getting really good at doing endurance type stuff because I was just spending so much time in the gym. But that wasn't my goal, and I thought that I was working towards my goal. And so that misconception that you need to be training a ton in order to get a ton of results is kind of wrong, and it can be misleading and harmful. There is a huge difference between training within a structured plan that's actually designed to get you the kinds of results that you want, and simply training for the sake of training and hoping that you get those results later. And that's, of course, what good training is about. It's about learning how to structure your training plan in such a way that you are actually achieving the goals that you want and not simply wasting energy getting adaptations that you don't want out of the process. And that, of course, requires a pretty solid understanding of just how bodies adapt and what kind of stimuli will provoke what kinds of adaptations in the first place. So recently I was reading through a study that I found through Mass Research Review, which I highly recommend. You can check out the link that I have below, which details essentially everything about Mass Research Review and why it is worth your money. Essentially, Mass Research Review is a way for you to get all of the best and most recent research reviewed and explained to you in simpler terms so that you can understand exactly what every single study that comes out is saying, the stuff that is most relevant to stuff like building muscle mass and building strength. And of course, while you don't have to spend a crap ton of time actually understanding studies, digging through studies, reading through journals, and things like that. So if you're interested, check out the link below, get some more information on Mass Research Review. In this case, I stumbled across a very interesting study, which was effectively not actually about how much people train. It was supposed to be a study essentially about protein intake. And so what they did was they took a bunch of serious professional bodybuilders and they just tracked a bunch of variables about them. And their main purpose was to figure out, okay, do the people who tend to consume more protein than is recommended still tend to get better results than the people who consume about the right amount of protein that is recommended? And so, yeah, they found that, there wasn't a huge difference between the two groups. But an interesting thing that they did do in the process was that they also tracked how much each of these bodybuilders trained. And so this is a very rare look into the way that serious bodybuilders actually train. I would say that there's a lot of stuff where, yes, people just sort of spread whatever stories, or it's like I heard a guy who, heard from a guy. There's all kinds of misconceptions and misinformation out there floating around. And so very often it's hard to get a real objective sense about, okay, how much are bodybuilders actually training? But these were pretty significantly experienced bodybuilders. They had on average about 5 years of training under their belts. So they were certainly no beginners. They were also competitive natural bodybuilders, which means ostensibly that they were drug-free. We don't really necessarily know if that was actually the case, so that may skew results a little bit, but it doesn't necessarily change things too much. The reality is that certainly drugs change the picture quite a lot, but at the same time, they don't change necessarily the best kinds of ways to train. So the end result is that, yes, some of them may have been using that may have skewed the results a little bit, but I would guess that it probably doesn't too much in this case. In general, they found that these lifters trained on average about 4 to 5 days a week, and they trained for about 60 minutes at a time. So this kind of blows a hole in the myth that people are training for 3, 4, 5 hours at a time. This is also something where, of course, the reality is that while you may only be training in the gym for 60 minutes at a time, there's, of course, a lot of extra sunk cost time that's added onto that. So when you go to the gym, you've got to hop in the car, maybe spend 15 minutes driving there, you've got to get changed, you do your workout, you take a shower, you get changed again, you drive back. So while the reality is that that may only be about an hour of training, there's certainly more sunk cost in terms of just time that you spent getting to the gym and coming back from the gym, and that does inflate that a little bit. So while 60 minutes may seem a bit low, that's not accounting for the things like travel time that get added on in a normal, daily, real-world, practical application. However, when you add that up, that's a pretty low amount of time to spend on a hobby, especially a hobby that you are, pretty good at. For example, when I was in university, I could spend 5 to 7 hours just in a single day playing World of Warcraft because I like doing that. Here, with bodybuilders, that's about how much time they spend in a whole week bodybuilding, training, actually getting the results that they get. And of course, you can cut down on the sunk costs of traveling to the gym quite significantly if you assemble a home gym, if you're working out from home, and so on. And so the end result is that you can actually get pretty jacked, competitively so, without a ton of training time. This is still a significant time commitment. Most of us don't just have an extra 5 hours in the week that we can throw out there. But if it's something where, hey, these guys are doing really well, these guys are pros, these guys are, seriously competitive, what could you accomplish with 2 hours a week, 3 hours a week, 4 hours a week? The reality is that you don't need to be following the best program in the world. And again, like I said earlier, there's diminishing returns with every additional unit of work that you put in. So it is something where you can even actually get awesome results by training just once a week, so long as you have a good program that is structured around that, and so long as you are sticking to it over the long term. I'm actually going to talk about that in another video as well, because there is some recent research that has come out that examined exactly this kind of training and showed that people had really amazing results. There's also all kinds of other time costs that, aren't really factored into this. So aside from just getting to the gym and getting back and so on, there's also just the fact that, of course, no one becomes a world-class lifter overnight without having done a ton of practice and a ton of research and all kinds of, just sinking all kinds of time into a hobby in order to get to that point where you can just sort of not think about it, train, spend a relatively short amount of time on the actual thing itself, and so on. So for example, if you're spending a bunch of time thinking about your diet, thinking about cooking so that you can prepare meals in advance, thinking about supplements, buying supplements, spending a bunch of time learning how to design a good strength training program, spending a bunch of time how to design a good bodybuilding program. Those are all time costs that can't really get factored into just, of course, the actual raw amount of time that you spend in a gym. So, of course, it's not as simple as saying, hey, you can just walk into the gym, train 5 hours, and be done. But it is, I think, less time than most people tend to think that you do need to spend in the hour in order to be competitive, in order to be good. What are some lessons that we can take away from this? Well, certainly there are going to be outliers who train a lot more than this. There are going to be people who spend 10, 15, 20 hours in the gym a week. Maybe because that is just what suits them. Maybe because that is just what helps them accomplish the goals that they are looking to accomplish. And they have the time and they enjoy doing it. So why not spend a bit more time squeezing out a bit more progress and a bit more results? Of course, at the same time, if you are not a professional, I would recommend not trying to train like a professional. Try instead to train like somebody who only spends maybe an hour at the gym a couple times, 3 times, 4 times a week, and just call it there, because that's already you getting 80, 90% of the results that you could get by putting in a crap ton more hours and putting in a lot more work and just getting exhausted and having that crowd out all the other time that you have in your life. We know that there are significant diminishing returns past just the first couple of sets of any exercise per workout. So you really don't need to spend a ton of time in the gym if your goal is not to be the next Arnold Schwarzenegger. If your goal is simply to be in better shape, to be stronger, to be leaner, you can accomplish that pretty easily so long as you're following the right plan, you're doing so consistently, and you're hitting the gym a couple times a week. This also isn't going to be the case for every kind of exercise, so it is different depending on what kinds of qualities you're training for. Specifically, when you're training for more endurance-focused sports, of course you need to spend a lot more time in the gym, you need to spend a lot more time training, simply because training for that endurance requires more overall volume of training in a general sense. If you're training to be good at running, if you're training to run a marathon, then you have to spend a lot more time training just by virtue of the fact that you're going to be training less intensely while you're actually in the gym and while you are actually training. And so as a result, you do have to spread that out much further, and that means that this kind of rule for, okay, how bodybuilders train will not necessarily hold true. Conversely, at the same time, you could be a power lifter and you could potentially even train less than that. If you are specifically training for strength, you can actually train with a relatively minimal program and gain a ton of strength pretty consistently. And I would say even not even training 4 days a week, training 2 or 3. And so that can be something where, depending on the kinds of goals that you have, and of course, assuming that you're following a program that's actually designed in the right way to get you towards those goals, you may or may not actually even need to spend as much time as bodybuilders do in the gym. There's also, of course, just the reality that as you get more experienced, a greater and greater volume of training over time is required to continue seeing adaptations, to continue seeing more results. And so that's a question of, okay, how dedicated are you to this method of training? Do I really want to kind of aim to become a pro and spend more and more time in the gym training? Or do I just decide that, okay, I've hit a certain level, this is kind of what I want, this is where I want to stop, and you just kind of stay at that level of volume and you stay at that level of results. So while, of course, starting off with just a small amount of volume in the gym, just a small amount of training is generally great and awesome, and it's going to get you awesome results in the beginning, over time, it may or may not be best for you if you have more competitive, more serious goals, and you would like to see how far you can push things. All in all, what matters most for most people is just being consistent. I cannot repeat this enough. You need to be able to go into the gym consistently so that those adaptations, which start off very small, start to add up little by little over time until you get bigger and bigger and bigger results. It's not something where you can just go to the gym once in a while, very inconsistently, and see results. The main thing there is consistently. So long as you are training consistently, even if it is just once a week, even if it is just twice a week, you can see pretty awesome results over time because those things do start to add up and do start to pay dividends in terms of your future effort. So I would say that you probably shouldn't worry about how little you train. You probably shouldn't get anxious. You probably shouldn't feel like it's holding you back or preventing you from getting the results that you want. It's far more likely that the reality is that if you are struggling, it is simply because you are not putting in the right kind of effort, which is to say that maybe your diet does not align with your goals. Maybe the kind of training that you are doing does not align with your goals. However, if you are following the right kind of approach, you will be making progress towards those goals consistently, so long as you are hitting the gym at least once a week. Once a week is all it requires to ensure that you are still moving forward. I would highly recommend Mass Research Review as a quick and easy way to get up to date on all of the most recent research, and at this point they have been making this magazine for a few years now. It's something where they have covered all kinds of different topics. So if you have any kinds of questions about basically anything related to building muscle mass, building strength, chances are that you can search through the archives and you can find it, and all it requires is that you set up a subscription and you have access to all of the back issues as well. So I highly recommend checking that out if you are interested. As always, if you like the video, don't hesitate to like, comment, subscribe, tell me what you want to see in future videos, hit that notification bell. I will talk to you all next week. Have a good one.